The night my grandfather died, something knocked from beneath the floorboards. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, like a signal meant only for me. I felt it in my bones before I even knew he was gone. The call came minutes later, my mother's voice shaking as she told me he had passed in his sleep. No struggle, no warning, just gone. But I already knew something wasn't right. I hadn't visited his house in years, not since I was a child who woke screaming from nightmares I couldn't explain. The place had always felt wrong, like it was watching me. Even then, I swore something lived there that wasn't human. 2 days later, I stood in front of the house again, keys trembling in my hand. The lawyer said it was mine now, every inch of it. I didn't feel lucky. I felt chosen. The front door creaked open before the key fully turned, as if it had been waiting for me. A cold breath slipped out from the darkness inside. It smelled like rot and something older, something buried. Inside, the silence was thick, almost alive. The walls were lined with deep scratches, marks I didn't remember from before. They weren't random. They formed patterns that made my stomach twist. I tried to convince myself it was just age, just decay. But the deeper I walked, the more the air pressed against my chest. It felt like the house was closing in around me. In the living room, my grandfather's chair still faced the window. It rocked slightly, even though there was no breeze. I froze, watching it, certain I wasn't alone. That's when I saw the symbols carved into the wood beneath the chair. They weren't scratches, not really. They looked intentional, etched deep like warnings or instructions. I knelt down, tracing one with my finger, and a sudden sharp pain shot through my hand. I pulled back to see a thin line of blood forming. The moment it touched the floor, the house seemed to exhale. A low, distant whisper crawled through the walls, too quiet to understand but too clear to ignore. It sounded like my name, repeated over and over. Each time it grew closer. Then came the sound again, that same knock from beneath the floorboards. This time it was louder, slower, and patient. And somehow, deep down, I knew it wasn't asking to come in. It was reminding me that I already had. The knocking didn't stop when I stepped away from the floor. It followed me, shifting beneath my feet like something pacing in the dark below. Every step I took was answered with one deliberate thud. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was pipes or old wood settling. But the rhythm was too precise, too aware. It felt like a response, not a coincidence. That night, I decided to stay, though every instinct told me to leave. I dragged a chair against the basement door and locked it twice. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that locks meant nothing here. Sleep never came, only long stretches of silence, broken by whispers I couldn't quite catch. They moved through the walls like breath through lungs. Sometimes they sounded close enough to feel against my ear. At exactly 3:07 a.m., something slid under my bedroom door. I watched it from the bed, too afraid to move at first. It stopped just inside the room, as if waiting for permission. When I finally forced myself closer, I saw it was an envelope. Yellowed, brittle, and sealed with something dark that looked too thick to be wax. My name was written on it in a handwriting I recognized instantly. It was my grandfather's, but the ink looked fresh. My hands trembled as I opened it, the seal cracking with a sound that echoed too loudly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded 3 times. The message was short, but it made my chest tighten. The debt has matured. Payment must begin with you. Beneath it was a symbol identical to the ones carved into the floor downstairs. The knocking beneath the house grew louder the moment I read it. It wasn't steady anymore, it was urgent, like something had just been given permission to move. I backed away, dropping the letter, but the whispers grew clearer now. They weren't just saying my name anymore. They were counting slowly, as if marking time. Every number felt heavier than the last, dragging the air down around me. By the time they reached 5, the walls began to creak. Dust fell from the ceiling like the house was shedding its skin. Then the basement door rattled violently downstairs. The chair I had wedged against it scraped loudly across the floor, and through it all I heard something unmistakable, a voice beneath the knocking, deep and patient, promising that the first payment was already due. By morning the house felt heavier, like it had settled deeper into the ground overnight. The air carried a faint metallic smell that clung to my throat. I hadn't slept, and the whispers hadn't stopped. The letter lay where I had dropped it, but something about it had changed. The ink looked darker, wetter, as if it had been rewritten while I watched. I didn't want to touch it again. I needed answers, something real to hold on to before I lost my mind completely. My grandfather had always kept records, stacks of papers he never let anyone see. If there was a truth, it had to be buried somewhere in this house. I spent hours searching through drawers and cabinets, uncovering nothing but dust and forgotten photographs. Faces stared back at me from another time, all of them carrying the same hollow expression. None of them looked truly alive. In his study, hidden behind a loose panel in the wall, I finally found it. A thick journal wrapped in cracked leather, bound with a string that had been tied too many times. My hands hesitated before opening it. The first pages were harmless, filled with dates and mundane notes about weather and money. But as I turned further, the handwriting changed. It became frantic, jagged, like each word had been carved rather than written. He spoke of voices that came from beneath the earth, promising him everything he had ever wanted. Wealth, health, and power beyond what any man deserved. All it required was a simple agreement. The next pages described the ritual in disturbing detail. Symbols carved into wood, blood drawn willingly, and words that were never meant to be spoken aloud. I recognized those same symbols from the floor downstairs. Then came the truth that made my hands go numb. He hadn't offered his own soul in the pact. He had offered the souls of everyone who shared his blood. My stomach twisted as I read the list of names written carefully in the margins. Generations of our family, marked one after another like inventory. My name was at the very bottom. The final entry was dated just days before his death. The writing was calmer again, almost relieved. He wrote that the collectors would come soon and that the first payment would begin with me. As I closed the journal, something thudded hard beneath the floor again. This time it wasn't just one knock, it was many. And beneath them all, I could hear movement, like hands dragging slowly upward, getting closer with every second. The first time I saw one of them, I thought my eyes were breaking. It stood at the end of the hallway where the shadows pooled the thickest. It didn't move, but it felt like it was watching me breathe. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving the darkness behind like a stain. My chest tightened as I backed away, trying to convince myself it had been nothing, but the air still felt disturbed, like something had just passed through it. That night, the house refused to stay still. Every wall creaked with slow, deliberate pressure, as if something inside them was stretching. The floor beneath me pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to any living thing. The whispers had grown clearer now, no longer distant or broken. They spoke in low, overlapping voices, each one repeating the same words. "It is time," they murmured, over and over again. I locked myself in my grandfather's study, clutching the journal like it could protect me. The symbols on the pages seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Every glance made them feel more familiar, like they were teaching me something I didn't want to learn. Then came the scratching at the door, slow and patient. Not frantic, not desperate, just steady, like something that knew it would get in eventually. Each scrape echoed through my skull. I held my breath as the handle began to turn on its own. The lock clicked loudly, then stopped, as if whatever was outside had changed its mind. For a moment, everything went completely silent. That silence broke with a whisper right behind me. It was so close, I felt it brush against my ear. "You were promised," it said in a voice that didn't belong to any human throat. I spun around, but there was nothing there, only the dim light and the suffocating air. My reflection in the window looked wrong somehow, like it was slightly delayed. For a second, I swore it smiled before I did. The knocking from below had turned into something worse. It wasn't just knocks anymore, it was pounding, desperate and relentless. The entire house trembled with each impact. Cracks began to form along the floorboards, thin at first but spreading quickly. From within them, darkness seeped upward like smoke. Shapes moved inside it, pressing against the surface. Then I saw the hands, pale and stretched, forcing their way through the gaps. Fingers scraped against the wood as they pulled themselves higher. And as they did, more figures appeared in the shadows around me, standing still, waiting for the moment I would finally understand that they hadn't come to scare me. They had come to collect. I ran from the study as the floor began to split, the sound of tearing wood echoing behind me. The house felt alive now, every surface shifting and breathing with purpose. It no longer felt like a place, it felt like a trap that had finally closed. The hands kept forcing their way through the cracks, multiplying with every second. Their fingers clawed at the air, reaching blindly but with terrifying certainty. I could feel them searching for me, drawn to something in my blood. I slammed the basement door open in a burst of desperation. The chair I had wedged against it flew aside like it weighed nothing. A cold, suffocating darkness poured up from below, thick as smoke, and just as alive. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, each step pulling me closer to the source of it all. The whispers grew louder with every step, no longer scattered but unified. They spoke with one voice now, low and endless. At the bottom, I found the room from my grandfather's journal. Symbols carved into every surface pulsed faintly, glowing with a sick, dim light. The air itself seemed to vibrate with something ancient and hungry. In the center of the room stood a stone slab, stained dark with something that had long since dried. Chains lay coiled around it, their metal blackened and worn. I knew instantly what it had been used for. The journal's final pages flashed through my mind, the part I hadn't wanted to accept. The pact could not simply be broken or erased. It could only be fulfilled or transferred. The voice came from everywhere at once, rising from the walls, the floor, and the darkness itself. It was deeper now, clearer than before. "One may stand for many," it said, each word pressing into my chest. I realized then what my grandfather had done. He hadn't just delayed the payment, he had passed it forward. And now I was the first in line to settle what he had started. The chains rattled on their own, lifting slowly from the slab as if guided by invisible hands. They hovered in the air, waiting. The symbols around the room pulsed faster, like a countdown reaching its end. I could hear my family in the whispers now, voices I recognized buried beneath the others. They were crying, begging, trapped somewhere beyond reach. And I understood the truth I had been running from. If I didn't take their place willingly, they would all be dragged into the darkness together one by one. The chains hovered in front of me, swaying gently like they were breathing. The whispers had fallen into a tense silence, as if the entire house was waiting for my decision. For the first time since I arrived, nothing moved unless I did. I stepped closer to the slab, my legs heavy but certain. The symbols carved into the stone pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Every beat felt louder, like it was being heard by something far beyond the room. The voices returned, but softer now, almost pleading. I could hear my mother among them, my brother, even relatives long gone. Their cries wrapped around me, pulling me toward the only choice that made sense. I reached out and touched the cold surface of the slab. A sharp pain shot through my palm as the symbol beneath it split the skin open. Blood seeped into the grooves, and the entire room shuddered in response. The chains reacted instantly, snapping around my wrists and ankles with violent precision. They tightened just enough to hold me in place. I didn't struggle because I knew this was what it wanted. The darkness thickened, rising from the floor like a living tide. It climbed the walls, swallowing the symbols one by one. With each one that disappeared, the whispers grew louder and more desperate. The voice returned, deeper than before, layered with countless others. "The debt is accepted," it said, echoing through every inch of the house. The words didn't feel spoken. They felt carved into reality. Pain spread through my body, not sharp but endless, like being slowly erased. My thoughts began to slip, replaced by something colder, something that didn't belong to me. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The chains loosened and fell away, clattering onto the stone. The darkness receded, leaving the room silent and empty. I collapsed to the floor, gasping, unsure if I was alive or something worse. The house above me was still again, as if nothing had ever happened, but deep inside something had changed. When I finally stood and looked at my reflection in a broken piece of glass, I understood the truth. My eyes weren't mine anymore. They were darker, deeper, watching from somewhere far below. And as I stared, I felt a faint knocking inside my chest, slow and patient, reminding me that the debt hadn't ended. It had simply found a new place to live.